While the founding fathers are remembered for their political genius, a lot of them were actually incredibly wealthy, some born into privilege, while others were self-made. Their fortunes came from land, law, business, and government work, and while some managed their wealth wisely, others died in financial ruin. Let's break down who inherited wealth, who earned it, and what happened to it after they died. Let's go. Of the many great individuals that led our nation in its earliest days, we can boil it down to 7 main founding fathers: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. Now, these men were of vastly different ages. At the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the oldest was Ben Franklin at 70, followed by George Washington at 44, John Adams at 40, Thomas Jefferson at 33, John Jay at 30, James Madison at 25, and Alexander Hamilton at 21. As such, many of these men had already achieved high levels of financial success, while some would use their newfound opportunities to achieve success in the coming decades. Now, George Washington was one of the wealthiest founding fathers, but he didn't start that way. He grew up the son of a third-generation colonist named Augustine Washington, who owned about 3,000 acres overlooking the Potomac River, which included Mount Vernon. Now, George was not given the privilege of studying in England like his 2 older half-brothers, Lawrence and Austin, as Augustine died when George was 11. As such, George received an irregular education and worked towards becoming a surveyor. When Lawrence married Anne Fairfax, a member of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Virginia, George was introduced to the elite class of colonial society. This connection gave him access to influential people and land opportunities. At the young age of 17, he landed his first job acting as a surveyor for Lord Fairfax mapping land in Western Virginia. Now, this job wasn't just necessarily about earning a living. It was about getting first-hand knowledge about valuable land, which he would buy later in life at a cheap price. After Lawrence's passing in 1752, George inherited Mount Vernon and eventually expanded the estate to over 8,000 acres. But land ownership alone didn't make him wealthy. Washington capitalized on opportunities that came with his military and political career. He was awarded thousands of acres of land for his service in the French and Indian War, and held on to them for later. Washington's wealth took a major leap in 1759 when he married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow who brought with her a massive estate, including 17,500 acres of land and nearly 300 slaves. While Washington was already a rising landowner, this marriage instantly elevated his financial status, giving him access to even more land and resources. Now, despite his immense wealth, Washington was not cash rich. Most of his fortune was tied up in land, crops, and business operations, making Mount Vernon costly to maintain. However, he was far more financially responsible than some of his peers. By the time of his death in 1799, Washington's estate was worth around $780,000, equivalent to over $600 million today. He held title to nearly 60,000 acres all across Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, the Ohio Valley, and Kentucky. One of the most notable financial decisions was his will, in which he arranged for the gradual emancipation of his enslaved workers, something that very few founding fathers did. Mount Vernon remained in his family for a time, but was eventually sold off due to financial struggles. Today it stands as a historical landmark, preserving Washington's legacy, not just as a leader, but as a businessman who strategically built and maintained one of the largest fortunes in the early United States. Thomas Jefferson is often remembered as being the author of the Declaration of Independence, but he was also a rather wealthy man, at least on paper. Jefferson was born into wealth, the son of Peter Jefferson, a successful planter and surveyor who owned over 7,200 acres and around 70 slaves. When Peter died in 1757, 14-year-old Thomas inherited the lion's share of his dad's estate, immediately making him one of the wealthiest younger men in the colony. Like many wealthy men of his time, Thomas Jefferson ran a plantation that grew wheat, tobacco, and other crops worked by enslaved labor. But unlike Washington, who was able to make his plantation profit, Thomas Jefferson began to accrue debt, a pattern that would define much of his life. Beyond his plantation, Jefferson was a lawyer and served in the Virginia's House of Burgesses, but neither of these roles provided enough income to cover his growing expenses. In 1772, he married Martha Wayles Skelton, a wealthy widow, who dramatically increased his fortune. Through his marriage, Jefferson inherited more than 11,000 acres of land and 135 enslaved workers from his father-in-law, John Wayles, who died in 1773. However, along with his inheritance came significant debt, as Wallace had borrowed heavily during his life. This meant that Jefferson not only had to manage his own financial burdens, but also those of his wife's family. For Jefferson, his Monticello estate was his pride and joy, but it never became the profitable plantation that he envisioned. Unlike Washington, who adapted his farming practices, Jefferson struggled with poor harvests, declining tobacco prices, and mounting debt. And instead of adjusting, he kept borrowing, using his land and his enslaved workers as collateral. Beyond his plantation, Jefferson had expensive tastes, fine European furnishings, thousands of bottles of French wine, and endless renovations to Monticello. His time in France as U.S. ambassador only fueled his love for luxury, and even his presidential salary couldn't offset his growing debts. After retiring, Jefferson was still drowning in debt, and to stay afloat, he sold land, personal belongings, and part of his book collection, which helped establish the Library of Congress, but it wasn't enough. When he died in 1826, Jefferson's debt were calculated to be $107,273.63, equivalent to millions of dollars today. His family was forced to sell Monticello, his remaining land, and even his enslaved workers. But what many people might not know about Jefferson is that he named his eldest grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, the executor of his estate. Randolph spent the rest of his life settling the debts, and when he died in 1875 in his 80s, the debts still remained. It was not until 1878, when Randolph's own estate was settled, that the debts were resolved. Today, Monticello stands as a historical landmark, but also a cautionary tale, as proof that one of America's greatest minds couldn't escape financial ruin. John Adams was one of the few truly self-made founding fathers. He grew up in Massachusetts, on the family farm, and received a formal education. His father was a deacon, cordwainer, and farmer, while his mother came from a prominent medical family. At age 15, he would attend Harvard University, after which he taught at a Latin school to earn enough money to go to law school. After graduating Harvard again, he began practicing law in 1759. Adams married Abigail Smith, the daughter of a prominent minister, and unlike some other founding fathers who married into immense wealth, Abigail did not bring significant financial assets to the marriage. However, she was highly educated and managed the family's finances with incredible skill, often managing the farm and household in the years to come when Adams was away on diplomatic and political duties. She played a strong role in keeping the Adams family on solid ground and ensured that they avoided the kind of debt that plagued the other founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson. Adams continued to practice law for over a decade until 1770, and by then he was a highly respected lawyer with a thriving practice. However, he was now to deal with his most important case ever, that would catapult him to new heights. A small event of no historical significance occurred, which was the Boston Massacre. John Adams was chosen to defend the British soldiers, and through his solid defense, none of the accused were sent to jail. While his decision was controversial, it demonstrated his commitment to justice and it earned him recognition. As time went on and tensions with Britain grew, he became one of the loudest voices for independence, helping draft the Declaration of Independence and later serving as a diplomat in France and the Netherlands during the Revolutionary War. His diplomatic work was crucial. He helped secure loans and alliances that funded the American war effort. Later, he played a key role in negotiating the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which officially ended the war and secured American independence. Unlike George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, who built their wealth through land speculation or plantations, Adams made his fortune through law, government service, and diplomacy. His legal practice provided early financial stability, but his real financial success came from when he was appointed as a diplomat. His service abroad came with generous compensation, and he wisely invested in land and property. As vice president and later president, Adams received a government salary, but he was never extravagant in his spending. Unlike the more elite circles in Philadelphia or Washington, D.C., he preferred the simple life of Massachusetts, and after leaving the presidency in 1801, Adams retired to his farm in Quincy, Massachusetts, where he focused on writing and managing his estate. When he died in 1826, he had a net worth of around $25 million in today's dollars, which ensured that his family remained financially secure for generations to come. The Adams family home of Peacefield remained in the family for generations and is now a National Historical Site, preserving the legacy of one of America's most disciplined and self-made founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin is the very definition of self-made wealth. While he was not born into money, he earned his fortune through sheer hard work, innovation, and investing. Born in 1706, Ben was the 15th of 17 children in a working-class family. His father, Josiah Franklin, was a candle maker and soap maker, while his mother came from a modest Puritan family. Josiah wanted Ben to have a formal education, but only had enough money to send Ben to school for 2 years before he had to stop. However, since Ben was one of the youngest, he had older siblings to rely on, and at 12 years old, Ben was able to apprentice for his older brother, James Franklin, who ran a printing business. Over the next few years, Ben learned valuable skills in printing and writing, which he would use to great effect later in life. Ben continued working as a printer and eventually opened his own printing shop in 1728. He eventually hit his big break in 1733 when he started publishing Poor Richard's Almanac. It became a wildly popular publication that had everything from advice, the weather, witty proverbs, poems, and more. He continued to print one once a year for the next 25 years, and it became a solid income stream. His business continued to expand to include further newspapers, book publishing, and the postal services. He was appointed Postmaster of Philadelphia in 1737 and Deputy Postmaster General of the American Colonies in 1753. These positions not only increased his wealth, but also gave him political influence. If it wasn't clear at this point, Benjamin Franklin was a very intelligent individual despite his lack of a formal education. To further add to his extensive resume, he was a prolific inventor and entrepreneur. Some of his more famous inventions are as followed: the Franklin stove, the lightning rod, bifocal glasses, flexible catheter, and the long arm. By the mid-1700s, Franklin had multiple income streams. He was involved in real estate, had many partners in the printing business, and government positions. And by 1748, he had semi-retired, handing over his printing business to his partners while focusing on science, diplomacy, and public service. He went on to help establish lending libraries, fire insurance companies, and even the first public hospital in America. During the American Revolution, Franklin spent his time being a diplomat in Europe, securing French support. He continued to write, invest, and contribute to public projects, solidifying his reputation as one of the most influential and financially successful founding fathers. By the time of his death in 1790, Franklin had amassed a substantial fortune. Now, the numbers vary online, but from what I can tell, his fortune in today's dollars would vary between $10 million and $90 million. While he left generous inheritance to his family, Franklin also made strategic financial gifts to Boston and Philadelphia. He established long-term funds designed to grow over 200 years, and by the 1990s, these funds were worth millions. The money was used to fund education, public works, and infrastructure projects, ensuring that Franklin's legacy wasn't just about personal success, but about investing in the future of others. Born out of wedlock in the Caribbean, Alexander Hamilton started with nothing, but eventually became one of the most influential figures in American history. Alexander Hamilton had a rough early life. Born in 1755 or 57, his father abandoned the family in 1766. His mother then went on to contract yellow fever and died in 1768. After that, Hamilton and his brother were in the brief care of their cousin before he ended up taking his own life. Nevertheless, Hamilton showed exceptional intelligence and drive from a young age, and his first big break came when he caught the attention of local benefactors who helped send him to New York to receive an education. He eventually attended King's College, now Columbia University, and that is where he learned about and became an avid supporter of colonial protests against British rule. Hamilton quickly made a name for himself as a skilled writer, penning pamphlets and essays that defended the colony's rights to self-govern. His ability to articulate complex political and economic ideas set him apart, and when the Revolutionary War broke out, he joined the fight. Hamilton served courageously in the Continental Army and quickly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming George Washington's aide-de-camp. His position gave him first-hand experience in leadership and strategy, while also placing him in the inner circle of America's most powerful figures. Further helping his rise, Hamilton married Elizabeth Schuyler in 1780. Elizabeth was the daughter of Philip Schuyler, a wealthy and influential landowner in New York, but also a general in the Revolution. The marriage connected Hamilton to one of the most powerful families in the state, providing him with social and financial stability that he had never known before. After the war, Hamilton leveraged his intellect and connections to rise to be one of the most influential voices in shaping the new nation. As a primary author of the Federalist Papers, he played a key role in ratifying the U.S. Constitution, and later became the first Secretary of the Treasury, laying the foundation for America's financial system. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Hamilton never amassed great personal wealth. He didn't inherit land or own plantations. He relied instead on the income of his law practice and his government positions. However, his workaholic nature and costly New York lifestyle often left him financially strained. In 1804, his political career was cut short when his long-standing rivalry with Aaron Burr led to a duel that unfortunately cost Hamilton his life. Though he had never amassed a great fortune, his financial and economic policies shaped the United States for generations to come. John Jay. Although not as widely recognized as his contemporaries, he was one of the most influential, wealthy, and well-connected founding fathers. Jay was born into a wealthy merchant family in 1745 and raised in Rye, New York. He received a good education and eventually went on to attend King's College, now Columbia University, where he studied law and quickly established himself as a rising legal and political mind. Jay practiced law in New York and over time gained national prominence as a staunch advocate for independence. When the Revolutionary War broke out, Jay played a critical role in diplomacy and governance rather than on the battlefield. To give you an idea, he served as the president of the Continental Congress in 1778, helping guide the war effort and kept the fledgling government together. He served as a diplomat to Spain from 1779 to 1782 in the hopes to secure financial and military support for the revolution. He was also one of the key negotiators of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which officially ended the war and secured American independence. After the war, Jay transitioned to law and politics, becoming one of the most influential voices in shaping the new nation. He served as Secretary of Foreign Affairs under the Articles of Confederation, which would later become the position of Secretary of State. He was a primary author of the Federalist Papers, which were vital in ratifying the U.S. Constitution. He was the second governor of New York, and he was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Thanks to his family fortune, high-profile appointments, and strategic marriages within the New York elite, Jay maintained a comfortable financial position throughout his life. Unlike many of the other founding fathers, he didn't rely on plantation wealth or speculative ventures. Instead, his status and wealth were sustained through law, diplomacy, and political service, as well as through smart land investments. After retiring from public service, Jay lived well and left behind a respectable estate in Katonah, New York, known as the Jay Homestead, which still stands today as a historical landmark, a testament to his enduring legacy and the quieter kind of influence he wielded behind the scenes. James Madison, also known as the father of the Constitution, was a brilliant political thinker, but he also came from substantial wealth. Born in 1751 in Virginia, Madison was raised on Montpelier, a sprawling plantation of over 5,000 acres that was worked by over 100 enslaved people. His father, James Madison Sr., was one of the largest landowners in the county, ensuring that young Madison grew up with both privilege and opportunity. Madison would receive an excellent education and eventually attend the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University. And while he was soft-spoken and physically frail, Madison would distinguish himself with remarkable intelligence and writing prowess. During the Revolutionary War, Madison began his public service in the Virginia legislature, where he worked on religious freedom reforms and helped draft the state's constitution. In 1780, at the age of 29, he was appointed to the Continental Congress, where he truly began to make a national impact. In Congress, Madison was known for his meticulous record-keeping and strong advocacy for a strong central government. He played a crucial role in organizing war supplies, supporting the military effort, and pushing for financial reforms to stabilize the new nation. While he wasn't commanding troops on the battlefield, his behind-the-scenes work was vital to sustaining the revolutionary cause. After the war, James Madison became one of the most influential architects of the young republic. He played a central role in drafting the U.S. Constitution, co-authored the Federalist Papers with Hamilton and Jay, helped frame the Bill of Rights, and served as Secretary of State under Jefferson before becoming the fourth President of the United States. His marriage to Dolly Payne Todd brought immense social and political advantages, but it did little to improve his financial standing. Despite his significant political achievements, Madison's personal finances were far less stable. Most of his wealth came through inheritance, specifically from his plantation, which depended heavily on enslaved labor. Like Jefferson, Madison had difficulty adjusting to the shifting economy. Declining tobacco prices, weak harvests, and growing debt gradually eroded his fortune. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he didn't diversify his income or transition away from the traditional plantation system. Over time, Madison was forced to sell land and enslaved people to cover expenses. His government roles, including Secretary of State and becoming the fourth President of the United States, offered prestige, but not enough income to sustain his lifestyle. When Madison died in 1836, he was deeply in debt, and Dolly Madison, once a celebrated First Lady, spent her later years in financial hardship, eventually selling Madison's papers to Congress just to stay afloat. Today, Montpelier stands as a preserved historical site, a testament to Madison's intellectual brilliance and foundational role in American history, even if his personal wealth didn't withstand the test of time. So who came out on top? Well, Washington, Adams, Franklin, and Jay managed their money well and left lasting wealth. Jefferson, Madison, and Hamilton struggled with debt, overspending, or bad investments. In the end, the Founding Fathers helped shape a nation, but their financial legacies are all over the place. Some left generational wealth, while others left people with their debt. It goes to show that even the most brilliant minds are not immune from financial difficulty. And with that, I'm Evan, and thanks for watching. If you liked what you just saw, then click on the video here. Also, if you haven't, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos.